always be shipping. That's a message you'll see throughout the hallways inside this warehouse. If you've driven down Chattahoochee Avenue near the works, also right down the street from Lucie Studios, you have driven by Saltbox. They got their start right before COVID, and in this episode, we're sitting down with one of their co-founders, Tyler Scribner. Lucie, the name means light. The majority of our team has worked in newsrooms throughout the country. We've seen the negatives. At Lucie, we explore the positives. And through this video series, we spotlight them. People, places, businesses, nonprofits, you name it. Storytelling is at the heart of our company, and we know sharing a story makes connections. It's simple, informative, and empowering. So without further ado, let's go. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us here on the Lucie Spotlight. It is bustling in here inside the Saltbox. Tell us where this idea originated.
Yeah, so I moved to Atlanta in 2016, and I'd come from Silicon Valley, and was working in big tech, and but at heart was an entrepreneur from Jacksonville, as we talked about earlier, and really wanted to experience a different form of entrepreneurship. And so I decided to buy a small e-commerce company, partly as an investment, but partly as an opportunity to, just dive into, again, a different type of entrepreneurship. And so I did that, and pretty quickly came to realize that running a logistically driven, small business was challenging, and I think the core of that challenge, the root of that challenge, was that we did not have the essential infrastructure that we needed, to operate well. We had to run, we had to turn our break room into a makeshift warehouse. We had to, bribe the mailman to take away all the packages. We had to use our basement at home as a photo studio, and it was just tough. And at some point, I realized that there were millions more entrepreneurs in the same situation. There were going to be many more, given the way things were going, and that it was a problem that was worth solving.
What was that first e-commerce business? What did you do?
It's a company called True Glory Hair, and we sell, I still own the company actually, and my wife leads it. We sell hair products, wigs, hair extensions, and the like. And it's a business that's grown over the years, but certainly at its core, it's still very much a small business.
And this, we're sitting in what is the first location for Saltbox?
This is actually our second location in Atlanta, and maybe our fifth or sixth location, nationally. The first location is just around the corner, a few minutes away, and you'll see that it's quite a bit smaller and a bit more humble. We didn't really know what we were doing back then, but now we make them pretty large.
And so when did you kind of see the shift? All right, this is really working out at that first location.
That's a great question. I mean, I think we opened at a challenging time. We opened the first location in December of 2019, and as March of 2019 brought a very different world to us. And there were there were many I think small points of signal that emerged there, but I think the one that stands out to me most is I was touring an early would-be member in Saltbox, and at the end of that tour, she almost began to shed a tear, and I said, what's going on here? And she said, I have to tell you, Tyler, I had a dream about this. I prayed about this, and here it is. And she said that. I said, what do you value most about Saltbox? And she said, honestly, when you're running a business out of your garage, it really kind of questions the core legitimacy of what you're doing. It kind of feels like the world maybe is against me, but when I step into this place that is clearly built to support me, I feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile. I feel like maybe I should be doing this, and maybe I can be successful. And so it just, in essence, gives me back a sense of dignity and confidence, that my business is worth running. And I don't think there's anything better that someone in my position, could hear. And so I've heard similar, forms of that many times over now, but, back in 2020, that was pretty meaningful to me, and I think gave me a lot of confidence that not only is what we were doing of practical value, but represented a form of value that went well beyond that and likely would really resonate with a lot of people.
Walk us through being an entrepreneur with your e-commerce business, and then the light bulb goes off, and then you have other co-founders. Y'all come together and you start formulating this business. Tell us about that journey.
For me, I've spent my entire life around entrepreneurship. As a young child, through high school, starting several companies, and then early in my career working for some very successful startups, and so I'm kind of this, right, and I know the good and the bad of it, and my wife would tell you that I have an idea about every day. I have a decent idea about once a month, right, and maybe never have a great one, but I thought that Saltbox was a great idea, I really did. But the important point I want to make actually is that, for me there was a clear distinction between whether or not this company should exist versus whether or not I should lead and start the company. And these are two different things, which I think is something that one doesn't instinctively get to. You have to kind of learn through trial and error that starting a business is very, very challenging, and just because an idea is a good one doesn't mean that you should do it. and so thankfully at that time I'd seen enough to be able to kind of delineate between those two considerations, but I was also convicted enough and personally passionate enough about the idea and the problem that I felt it was worth pursuing, and personally. And I, just before we came on camera here, you saw a very honest interaction I had with our very first member at Saltbox, and I remember vividly moving Brandon's gigantic commercial refrigerator into that building, and so you can imagine that for me, now almost 6 years later, just to see him not only succeeding, but to see him still here is incredibly rewarding, and that's why I decided to do it. Because I said, hey, this is I think one of the takeaways from an earlier part of my career. I worked at a company called Palantir. Is that there's just no substitute for building a true mission-driven business. Every company has a mission, in theory, but in reality, very few companies have actual missions that we would properly consider to be an impactful mission in the world. Palantir is certainly one of those companies, and I believe that Saltbox is as well. And I believe that working for or leading a mission-driven company is one of the most rewarding things you can do, with your time.
I hope you held on to your Palantir stock.
If I did, candidly, I would not be sitting here with you right now. But I held on to enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
no one can. It's hard to envision a company, adding $300 billion to its market cap in 1 year.
What does the name Saltbox mean? Where did it come from?
Yeah, Saltbox. There's kind of the funny version of that story, and then there's the version that I think we try to tell today. The funny version of the story is, we went to. I originally named the company SparePad just as a placeholder. Pretty obvious but boring name, and hired a firm here in Atlanta to help us come up with some names. One of the names they came up with was Saltbox. My first reaction to that name was no, I don't like it. But I was sitting one day in a Starbucks with one of my co-founders, and we were discussing this, and I said, if Starbucks can be Starbucks, then Saltbox I think can be Saltbox, because they have a similar alliteration, I think is the word I'm looking for. No one knows what a Starbucks is, but it seems to work quite well. And Saltbox sounds the exact same phonetically, and so let's go with that. And which I think is true, by the way. I think it is a structurally good name, but more importantly, I think once we got over that hurdle, we began to find real meaning in the name. And the meaning in the name is that, a salt box, as you may know, is a form of, a residential architecture that was really popular in the 17th and 18th centuries. And, the house kind of has a flat front and a lean-to roof structure that kind of goes like that. And in the back of the house, you have a working shed. Maybe you were a welder or, something of this nature, doing hard work, but you would retreat, in the evenings back into your home, and it was comfortable and warm. And we thought that was a good analogy for, what's happening here, right? Obviously in this space, people are working, we see that and we hear that, and it's, all things considered, it's pretty hard work, but they can retreat into the front, and it's very comfortable. And as a general matter, I think, Salt Box is a place that kind of represents a certain form of home for the entrepreneurs that work here. And so that all made a lot of sense. And so we kind of got the best of both worlds.
What kind of businesses are in your different Salt Box locations?
Honestly, anything that you can imagine. I think that the broadest way to characterize the companies that operate out of Salt Box would be as, product-based, small businesses, although we have a good number of large businesses at this point as well. But these are companies whose business is, fundamentally dependent upon some form of logistics enablement, right? They, are receiving freight, they are storing inventory or goods, they are shipping products to customers. That can take many different forms. And I've seen just about every kind of product you could imagine here, but that's the core. Beyond that, you will find interior designers, you will find florists, you will find equipment rental companies. I recently saw a company that is they are into satanic worshiping, and they sell products. Right? I mean, it's all here.
Just anything.
Yeah. The beauty of it is that it's a true. If you look across our more than 1,000 members now across the country, it is a true cross section of small business in America, and it's really beautiful. We a couple of years ago we did an effort we called Salt Box Across America. We built a salt box on wheels, essentially a cargo container, and we drove it across the country through dozens of small towns and big cities, visited lots of salt boxes, visited lots of Main Street small businesses, had hundreds and hundreds of conversations, and as a reflection of who we are and what we stand for. And I just think that we'd like to say that everyone loves small business. I think that to not love small business in America is to not be American in a certain way. It's just not acceptable. And here again, I think if you have an opportunity, as we have, to build a company that is exists to serve those businesses, it just creates an enormous amount of positive energy and tailwinds behind that mission that I really, really value.
You all have 11 locations now. Where do you take it from here?
We're going to continue growing. We're truly just getting started. I think we've seen in the past year, really this year, that awareness and understanding of the value of our product, both from the SMB side, our customer, but also candidly, from the real estate side of the industry, has really awakened. People now see, the value and see the opportunity, and Saltbox, I believe is well positioned as the kind of category creator and leader of this market. And today we have a little over 1,000 members across the country. We know that there are literally millions of companies that would love to operate in a salt box if they had the opportunity or knew that was a possibility. And we're going to just continue to grow as fast as we can in order to meet them all.
How did you all get off the ground? Were you spending time out in Silicon Valley? You hear about all these companies taking on investments. So did you guys take on some seed money as well to get this off the ground? How did that happen?
We did, yeah. We've raised a little over $50 million of equity capital since we started the company. And a lot of that capital, particularly early on, came from venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, and which are great. We have some wonderful investors. But I will say, increasingly, we are focused on raising capital to the extent that we need to locally, and that is really nothing more than a reflection of the fact that my leadership team and I think have come to believe that it's in the same way that we're building community across the Saltbox ecosystem. We think it's important to lean into the investment community, in this case, in our own home. And so we will likely raise a bit more capital in the future. But I think whereas 6 years ago, the Tyler 6 years ago would have been very kind of anchored in Silicon Valley, is now maybe a bit more anchored right here in Atlanta.
A lot of our viewers, listeners, they're either starting about launching a business, they have a business, they're facing challenges. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you all have faced and how you've been able to overcome them?
Yeah, well, I can write you 3 books if you'd like. Yeah. A book per year. You tell me how much you want. That question, framed in that way is nearly impossible, right? But I'll have to just meet it with some similarly abstract ideas. And I think, the first thing that I would say is, advice I would give here to an entrepreneur is just to recognize that building a business is, fundamentally about solving a never-ending series of problems. I think that, there's a common misperception that company building gets easier, as one gets bigger. In my opinion, this is not true. I think it is more akin to, attempting to hike up Mount Everest, right? And then there are a couple of things that are, I think, kind of universal truths about that experience. Thing number one is that, every step you take, you are in fact a little bit closer to the top. You're a little bit closer to the goal, whatever that goal may be. It's good. Thing number two is that every step you take, there's a little bit less oxygen and you have a little bit less energy, right? And the next step is going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's just how it is. And I think the same thing is true when you build a company. And sometimes people get to the top. They often question themselves, how did I get here? I don't know, but sometimes they do. You just kind of keep going. So I tell my team this all the time, like, hey guys, our job is to, just every day solve this never-ending series of problems. And if that doesn't sound fun to you, then you're just in the wrong place. I think the next thing I'd say is that what keeps, given that first point, what enables companies to do that, what keeps them together is culture. If you have not created a place that people love working at, where there's trust, humility, self-awareness, vulnerability, etc., then it's just not going to work. To extend the analogy, try hiking up Mount Everest with some people that you really don't like. It's just that's not going to work out. It's not a good idea. And so you got to get that right. I think if you can get the culture piece right, and I think if you recognize what you're in for, and for whatever crazy reason you are motivated to do that, then you've got a good shot. And if you have, if in fact, the problem you've identified is a real problem, and if in fact you iterate towards, the real solution, you're never going to start there, but you get there, and you don't quit, then you'll probably be successful. But there's some important things that kind of come together in that equation.
Having spent time on the West Coast, why did you settle on Atlanta being the first Saltbox location?
Yeah, well, I mean, Atlanta was at that time my home, I'd been here for, 4 years at that point. And so it was, natural and easy. I think, maybe in some ways a more interesting question is like, why did I come to Atlanta? Because my wife and I moved here, purely out of choice. We looked at a map and we decided we didn't want to, spend the next decade or whatever it may be in Silicon Valley. We loved our time there, but frankly felt it was becoming a bit more of a bubble than we would like to live in, like to raise our son in, and we wanted to get out into what we considered more of the real world. And I think that Atlanta is a real world as far as I'm concerned. It's for better and for worse, right? But it's also a city that is, as is thriving. It has I think a very, very positive future, and that future is benefited and compounded by entrepreneurs making the decision to move here, and so it was a natural place to start because of where we are, but it was also kind of an intentional choice that had been made a few years prior, but I'm very proud of the fact that Atlanta is our home, and Atlanta has been as a community has been incredibly supportive of the Saltbox.
You say that, although one of my most favorite comments I see on social media when something crazy happens in Atlanta is not a real place.
Well, in fact, it is so real that unreal seeming things happen here. When's the last time you saw such a meme coming out of Palo Alto? It's like,
it's true.
It's not happening.
You gotta love Atlanta for what it is. Walk us through, the services that you guys do for businesses. How does it work? Someone's coming into Saltbox for the first time. What do you tell them?
Yeah. So usually it's worth talking about where they're coming from. Usually they're coming, from their spare bedroom, from their, break room, from their basement, et cetera. Some sort of, inadequate, place from which to be running a business. Inadequate both in its infrastructure and capability, but also, frankly, inadequate in its, in its, the dignity that it creates or does not create for, that entrepreneur. And so they come to Saltbox, and, pretty quickly they begin to envision, what their life would be like if they didn't have to have their spouse, hating them because they're taking up all the space. If they didn't have to have their neighbors hating them because the driver accidentally left the pallet in their yard instead of their own. If they didn't have to drive to the post office 4 days a week, they begin envisioning these things. If they didn't have to call their cousin or friend to help pack extra orders when things are really busy, they begin envisioning that reality, and they begin liking that vision, and they begin observing the other 150 entrepreneurs in the building who have the same basic plight, and and that makes them feel a bit better, and so that's kind of how it goes, so it's a we have to explain Saltbox quite a bit to kind of the unfamiliar, the real estate professional, right? But for the would-be customer, no explaining is necessary. They walk in and they're like, where's the contract? And then we tell them it's a month-to-month contract, and they're really excited about that. So, we provide, first and foremost, the critical infrastructure, the critical services, labor services and the like to support these product-based, small businesses, and as you've kind of heard me allude to before, we also, I think, provide a significant intangible, which is, this kind of implicit acknowledgement by way of Saltbox's existence, which is to say it's purpose-built for them, that, your business, it should be here. There's a sign on the wall right here that says, your dreams deserve more space, right? And I think that kind of says it all. And this place is big enough for a lot of dreams.
And I liked the message back there. Instead of ABC, always be closing, it says always be shipping.
Always be shipping.
Yeah.
Always be shipping. Right. This is the engine of these companies. You know, this is the engine of so much of small business America today. Again, is these logistics-based companies: receive, store, ship, receive, store, ship. Right, all day, every day. And if you're not shipping, then your business is not running.
And one of you talked about just having ideas and whether or not you pursue them or not.
Yeah.
In my early entrepreneurial days, one of my ideas, this was so bad. My dad used to just call some of my ideas harebrained ideas, but I was like, I'm going to do an Easter egg hunt for dogs, and I called it Easter ball. And so I had these pastel colored balls, the smaller ones, and packaged them like the Easter eggs that you see in CVS and elsewhere. And I started negotiating with factories in like Pakistan, India, and learned a lot. And I learned, well, the majority of these goods are coming from China for a reason, because to have those balls made in the US, it's going to be like $2.50. In China, it was like 15 cents. And so the UPS guy shows up to my house, and he just kept unloading boxes and boxes. And I was putting him in my shed, and my wife's like, what
the hell
are you doing?
See, here, you could have hidden all that.
I could have hidden it here. You would have
been none the wiser, and you would have been a Easter egg dog.
I quickly realized I sold them, fortunately, probably broke even, and then donated the rest. So I'm like, this is not for me.
I've done that many a time.
But you got to try, You got
to try. You got to try. You never know who you're going to find at Softbox. I think one of the most interesting companies that I encountered one day, it was in Miami. There was a unnamed but major medical device provider who operates a urgent delivery kind of dispatch center, and so they have these spinal cord surgery cases. They're these kind of look like bombs, these silver hard shell cases. And when there's a traumatic injury, when someone breaks their back, they literally dispatch these things to the hospital, and so it's what sort of place do you find a florist next to that life-saving dispatch office.
In essence, might be where you can say this is really where the magic happens.
This is where the magic happens. This is the lifeblood of Saltbox, right? Packages coming and going all day. And I think one of the core value props of what we do is the ability just to drop this stuff off here and leave. If you've ever been in the position of a small business who's shipping often, you're very familiar with having to chase the mailman, or having to, get to the UPS store just before it closes, and just before you got to cook dinner at home. And so the ability to drop off and run, or the ability to receive, a full, truck full of freight while you're off on vacation or, wherever you may be, is really a wonderful thing.
What is it like for you, walking through the hallways here of Saltbox and seeing the growth that you guys have been able to accomplish over your existence?
In a word, it is deeply fulfilling, but also it really pulls at you. And the reason it pulls, the fulfilling piece perhaps is obvious. I think the challenge of it is not obvious. And the challenge of it is that, when you build a place like this, that, is home to 150 plus small businesses, you see it all, right? You see the joyful moments, the success, but you also see the hard moments. And you become very invested in the success of these companies. And when they don't succeed, that's difficult, And so, I, of course, want to see everyone here achieve great success. But that's just not the reality.
How many businesses are in this particular Saltbox?
There are about 165 companies here.
Okay,
and
great.
A little over 1,000 nationally today. And
Gotcha.
Of course, continue to add more.
And content, that's our world. I see you guys have the content studio.
We certainly don't have the same setup as you guys, but these, our members take a lot of pictures.
Come on in.
And so we provide this space to conduct shoots, and it provides the core of what you need,
Yeah.
some good lighting, good backdrops, etc. And we don't actually execute the photography, but we have, a lot of folks in the ecosystem who are, always happy to come in. We also have a podcast studio as well.
Yep. Where's that?
That's
Let's go look at that. Let's go check it out. We just saw the content studio. Now we're in the podcast studio.
Yeah.
I mean, share with all the businesses out there, the business owners that are watching. You guys built this for a reason. The whole point of, promoting the business is all about content.
Yeah. Well, listen, no better way today to be heard than to have a podcast, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a podcast, what are you doing? I don't have one, by the way.
Yeah.
So
it's becoming saturated, but there is still,
when
you stick with it, you
exactly.
got to stick with it.
It's funny enough, I actually, we made a few podcast episodes back in 2020. In fact, we actually had Garrett on those podcasts, Garrett from Flock Safety, and a number of really wonderful entrepreneurs, but did not stick with it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we created this, out of demand. A lot of our members, obviously are looking for ways to grow and tell their stories, and so. But I think that the bigger point for us, though, is that core to our business model and strategy is taking big, expensive, capital-intensive things that small businesses need and fractionalizing access to those things in a way that make them accessible. And so whether it's a podcast studio with with a few $1,000 worth of equipment, or whether it's a forklift or a warehouse, the concept there is the same. Take the big thing, make it smaller, make it more flexible, and make it accessible.
Tell me about some of the success stories that you hear day in and day out. I mean, when you and I were walking and we heard about Brandon, who's got the hot dog business, and he said, "I'm growing with you guys. I'm in this location now." Share some of those stories with us.
Yeah, so I think those stories kind of fall into two camps. They're the ones which you'd be very impressed by. Flock Safety, for example, the tremendous, massive Atlanta success story at this point. Started right here at Saltbox, and was a large member of ours for many years. And now, even every time I see Garrett, he reminds me of how much he and his team love being here, and how they wish we would have created a bigger Saltbox. So you have these sorts of stories for sure, but the truth of the matter is that is not the typical reality of Saltbox, right? I think the true success story is really a lot more like what you heard from Vander. This is an entrepreneur who sells hot dogs and sausages. They're quite good, by the way. I've had a lot of them, but the reality is, they've been running this business, for many years now, almost a decade, and he's had amazing years, and he's not had not amazing years, and he's still a small business, right? And that's the story. The success for so many of our members, is, which, by the way, is true of my own e-commerce business. Is like, can I be here in 5 years? And can I be a little bit bigger, a little bit better, a little bit smarter? And so, and I think it's really important to celebrate, those stories. And that success, because if you look at any, I think we created this thing some years ago. It was a Saltbox logo that was a mosaic of individual images of faces of small businesses, and I think that kind of tells a story in the sense that generally speaking, any one of these stories is at once deeply compelling, because I assure you that if you sat down with any one of the entrepreneurs and said, "Hey, tell me your story," it'd be an interesting story. It'd be full of triumph and tragedy. There would be drama. There'd be all kinds of things. And yet, every single one of them is quite small. It's quite a small story. But if you zoom out and you look at the totality of the story of small business in salt blocks or in America, it is, one of the most compelling stories that humanity knows, right? And so, I think it's important to look at it from both perspectives. But I think the piece of the story for me that is not that important actually is when one little dot in that screen kind of grows out into something huge. It has its own story, and Garrett does not need me to bolster the story of Flock Safety. They're doing quite well, but the other 150 companies here, they do, and so that's where we try to put our spotlight.
If you could go back to day one when you all started Saltbox, what's some advice you'd give yourself?
I think the advice that I would give myself is internally, not externally, but internally, more slow and more steady. Turns out that one can pretty easily burn out doing this sort of thing, and that is not good. And so it's a long game, right? I think we are 5.5 years into our journey, and very much feels like day one around here. And the truth is, I would tell you that every day, for the past 5 years. But it's also true, I'll probably tell you that every day for the next 5 years. And that's just kind of the truth. It's always day one at a startup. And so you've got to pace yourself, and you've got to kind of recognize the kind of long arc of building a meaningful business, and just enjoy every day, and be less focused on a destination and more focused on, did I make good decisions today? Did I get a little bit better? And did I get enough sleep? Because I have to get up and do it again tomorrow.
For those that are looking for a spot like Saltbox, like what is the entry point so that they know, like what kind of cost structure are they looking at?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. And what's exciting about that actually is that we continue to lower the kind of barriers and cost to entry into Saltbox. So if you want a physical dedicated warehouse suite in Saltbox, that starts today around $800 a month or so, and that's going to give you access to the entire facility, to the co-working aspects of the building, but more importantly to the loading docks and the ability to receive large volumes of freight here, to our on-site services, eForce and Flex Storage and things like this. But as I mentioned, we're lowering that barrier, and so we recently launched and introduced a new offering which we call access plans. There's a starter access plan and a kind of essential and pro, I believe they're referred to as. And these are, you can think of these as being the equivalent of a kind of a deskless co-working membership, except for it's obviously in a different context. And so, the value here is not so much to be able to come and work out of Saltbox, which you can certainly do, and which people do, but rather the ability to, without having dedicated space, be able to receive inbound shipments here and pay on demand, to be able to have on-demand flexible storage at Saltbox, which means that without having your own warehouse suite, you can store a single package for a day, or you can store 100 pallets for a year, and you can wind up and wind down just as you need to. So it's a bit like AWS. It's a bit like cloud computing in a sense, and that's really where we are headed over the long term, is making critical logistics infrastructure and services something that is highly accessible, and both in terms of literal convenience, but also in terms of pricing flexibility. And the access plans start now at $100 per month. So it's quite affordable.
Very
again,
affordable.
It's a consumption-based model, and flexibility is the key to affordability for so many of our members.
Tyler, thank you so much. Congrats on
Thank
your
you, Craig.
growth over the past 5.5+ years. And we can't wait to see what's next.
I appreciate it.
11 spots and beyond, I guess, huh?
Yeah, 11 to 500.
There we go, 11 to 500. Lofty goals, but very possible goals.
Very possible.
All right, man. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. Our mission is simple. Create your news. When we create it, we hope to spotlight your purpose. Life's too short to be stuck in a world that becomes stale. What's your purpose? Are you living it? If not, the time is now. Thanks for listening and watching Carpe Diem.